Fantastic. So welcome to the webinar. Today, Michael Parker from The Conversation UK and I, Mark Reed from Fast Track Impact and Newcastle University, will be introducing to you the Media Impact Guide and Toolkit. Now, this is a toolkit which we developed primarily for press offices, primarily for the UK. But what we're finding already is that academics and other researchers are finding this useful, and press offices in other countries are already giving us feedback that this is something that they need and that they can use as well. I'm going to give you a bit of an introduction to why we thought this was important, and then I'm going to hand over to, I'll do some of the research that was built into this, cover some of that, and then I'll hand over to Michael, who will be, Michael, you are here, fantastic. Sorry about that. Michael will be then going through the toolkit, giving you a tour and diving into a couple of case studies. Michael, do you want to say anything by way of introduction?
Thanks, Mark. And yes, hello, everyone. Thanks very much for coming. I'm delighted to see so many people here. I say see, I mean see your avatars. Yeah, we're really thrilled to finally bring this media toolkit to you. This was sort of the genesis of a conversation Mark and I had almost a year ago, in fact. And I think it really is going to play I hope it's going to play a really useful role in how press teams and research teams work with each other in this our second ref year, more than any, but also, you know, for the foreseeable future. So yeah, we're going to whip through it today and explain how it works and what it's for. Mark will, as the primary author, will be there to explain the long and the short of it. But I'm really thrilled to have been able to have brought the sort of the press office networks that the conversation has built over the last 6-7 years, alongside the network of research impact officers and research teams and general, you know, ref expertise that Mark and Fast Track Impact bring, and put those two together to provide, we hope, a tool that will be genuinely really useful for you. So that's enough from me. Maybe Mark, you'd like to just take it away, and I'll chip in.
Great, thank you very much, Michael. It has been a real pleasure. I've thoroughly enjoyed producing this with you and your colleagues, and co-producing this with the community of press officers that you work with. And essentially what we're going to do is look at the challenges, some of the research findings built into this, the guide and toolkit itself. Michael will do that, and we'll dive into a couple of case studies. The challenges, as Michael has already begun alluding to, start with this thing called the REF, which is the Research Excellence Framework, a scheme run by the UK government to evaluate the quality and impact of UK research. And 25% of a university's scores are based on the impact of their work. And every time that you've got a top scoring case study, you potentially will get, over the next 7 years, up to £500,000 or more pounds. So this is high stakes. And the problem that we've got is that we have different teams within universities who are not talking to each other, trying to achieve impact from research in very different and often incompatible ways. So prior to media engagement, researchers and press officers rarely engage directly to plan impact, while the ref teams, when they're doing their job well, are actively engaged in planning how those researchers might generate impact and have visibility to many of the opportunities for media engagement, but there isn't that joined upness. And as a result, media opportunities are often missed or poorly targeted for impact. And ultimately, you don't get the evidence that there was actually anything meaningful that arose from that coverage, just reach metrics and the like. Now, for me, this is a problem because theoretically, reach means very little if there is no significance to the impact that you have achieved. Imagine that I achieve something in every country of the world that nobody actually cares about, that's kind of incremental and meaningless. Well, do I have something to shout about? Do I have something to be proud of? I would argue probably not. Or even worse than that, something that, that actually has negative unintended consequences or side effects. And because I've managed to get that in every country of the world, I have simply compounded the problem and scaled the negative problems as well as the positives. So what I need is evidence, not just that we have gotten reach, which is very easily measured through media engagement, but that at least some of those people who engaged with that media got some kind of significant benefit from that. At minimum, that they understand something they didn't before, but potentially far more than that. So based on this, I believe that there are 3 ways in which press offices could support impact more effectively. And this toolkit is designed to enable press offices to deliver this kind of support and to work more collaboratively with ref teams and academics to do this in a much more efficient way than is done before. And for those of you who are coming into this from the perspective of an academic or professional services staff working on impact, I want you to listen to these as well to understand what press offices can do for you to enable you to get impact and for you to demonstrate that impact and get that at scale. So first of all, missed opportunities. The problem is that researchers often miss opportunities for the media to help them engage with and generate impact because they're not forward planning. And so one of the things that we're trying to do with this toolkit is to support researchers to develop impact plans that pre-identify opportunities for media engagement that are highly targeted and at the right point in the process. And as part of this, it's not just the media engagement that's planned, but the steps that will follow from that media engagement all the way through to specific measurable impacts for specific groups who need help. The second of these ways which we might be able to support impact more effectively through the media is through better targeting. The problem here is that if you haven't got a clear impact goal, I just want to get the message out vaguely, for example, then it's very hard for press offices to prioritize the kind of angles or outlets that will actually enable us to generate impact. And so the solution is that we actually have a much clearer understanding of real felt need, things that are actually challenges beyond the economy, benefits that we want to get. And we know who those people are who will benefit. And so we're now prioritizing relevant outlets and key messages that will appeal to and drive change in those particular audiences that are embedded within our story. So for example, for a lot of my research, I do research with farmers and conservationists, targeting a conservation magazine or Farmers Weekly, despite having tiny circulation compared to the Guardian newspaper, would probably get me significantly more impact than even a front page story on the Guardian newspaper. Thirdly and finally, I think that we need to think much harder about how we can resolve some of the mismatches between the kind of metrics that ref is driving ref teams and academics to prioritize versus the kind of metrics that press offices are judged on. And press offices primarily focus on performance indicators that are based on reach, whereas the ref teams are primarily focusing on indicators that focus on significant. And whilst I've said that significant might be the more important of the two, we ideally need both. Yeah, I changed someone's life. Now, can I replicate that to change a whole load of people's lives? And that's where the media can really come in. So I need both, and the toolkit is designed to enable us to do that by signposting researchers to collect the kind of data that will actually demonstrate significant impacts from media engagement. And that will, of course, then supplement the reach-based metrics that press offices already provide. Now, some of the research that we did behind this was a survey. We co-produced this with Michael's team, and Michael helped to get this out to press offices, and we also got responses from researchers and professional services teams working on impact. It's a modest response, but looking through this, we did a qualitative analysis suggesting that we had broadly reached theoretical saturation and some very interesting and useful findings for this. So whether you want to take this as illustrative for the handbook versus some deep social science, I don't really mind too much. But the key thing here is that there are findings that can direct our practice and that have informed how we have hence designed this toolkit. So first of all, it was very clear that media engagement was important across this community for generating impact. And so this, for me, is part of the rationale for why this is so important. We understand that this is a key pathway to impact, but we don't understand always how to harness that in terms of generating significant and measurable impact. Interestingly, the broadest awareness of this was amongst the research community. Researchers themselves all recognizing this as an important pathway to impact. I wonder whether some of the press officers, professional impact staff, just with a slightly more holistic understanding of the many additional pathways to impact that you can achieve that do not require media engagement. This is not, for me, an indication of skepticism on their part. Second of four sets of findings here was that researchers sadly were unanimously unable to identify any kind of impact arising from media engagement that could be classified as significant. Now, that didn't apply to the press officers and professional services staff. Again, I think at just a higher level of knowledge and understanding around impact, perhaps in that community, understanding what we mean by significant impacts. What we got from researchers instead was a whole load of pathways. So media engagement is great because it gets you additional media opportunities and it puts you in front of people and gets conversations with people. Great. It does lead to additional forms of engagement. But what we wanted to know was what might be some of the significant impacts that uniquely arise from media engagement. And we did get some fantastic answers. And from that, we then constructed a series of detailed case studies, and Michael will cover some of those in his segment in a moment. Now, worryingly, a number of professional services staff and researchers had at least at some point advised a colleague not to engage with the media. Press officers regularly complain that it is hard and in fact increasingly hard to persuade academics to engage with the media, to prioritize this. And one of the reasons for this was the lack of perceived relevance for the research excellence framework, and a perception that engaging with the media simply gets you reach. It might raise your profile, and maybe some long-term indirect benefits from this, but this is not the kind of stuff you need to get impacts for REF. Now, perhaps some more legitimate reasons in here. Well, you're not ready yet. We don't have strong enough evidence, for example, a very legitimate reason not to engage with the media. But this idea that media engagement will not get you irrefutable impact is something that we very clearly dispelled through the collection of stories and evidence of very significant impacts, and at least two of the case studies that we have are going forward as REF impact case studies in 2021. I've got a quote at the end of the slide here, just illustrating some of this concern and skepticism. So this was an academic talking about press offices, saying, I'm not sure they're invested in impact. Certainly in my institution, I think the media office is more focused on getting branded stuff out to attract future students. There's a need in this context for a culture change to help make the media office more aware of why they might connect with researchers. Now, this is a perception, and I don't know based on this sample how widespread this perception is, But this is not a perception that matches what Michael and I heard from the Conversations Media Advisory Group as they advised us on the construction of this Media Impact Toolkit. A huge awareness in this group that they have a hugely important role to play, that they are invested in this, and a desire for the tools they need to fulfill that role. So whilst there may be perception challenges, I think that the deeper culture challenge is perhaps one that is already being addressed, and one that we hope this toolkit will help to embody. Now, Press Office staff regularly interacted with impact teams in professional services, and we found that vice versa, the same was true. And for us, this is very encouraging. Of course, when you look at these stats, you can see there is room for improvement. And so the final part of the toolkit is a series of ideas on how press and impact teams could work more effectively together. I'll leave you to read some of those ideas in your own time as you explore the toolkit for yourself. But I'll leave you with a few ideas that many of you may be instantly interested in that came out of the survey in terms of how we might increase researcher engagement with press offices around impact. And the first, in fact, relies on the toolkit itself. The idea that evidence of significant, potentially referable impacts arising from media engagement needs to be more widely available. We need to trumpet this from the rooftops, that actually it is possible to create these kinds of impressive and inspiring impacts through media engagement. This is not just about creating a noise and reach, it goes much deeper. There were suggestions for face-to-face meetings with key researchers and impact champions as part of inductions, as part of regular monthly or annual meetings with research teams, schools, etc., to build those relationships, to build trust, and to increase the interactivity and the awareness of opportunities for each of those teams to help each other, and the press office and ref teams to help researchers meet their goals. Perhaps this is a bit crass, I don't know, but I'll let you make your own mind up about this. But the idea that we might reframe the press office offering to researchers motivated by impact, by the ref agenda, that this isn't just getting a press release, this is press release plus impact data gathering for ref. So read some of the suggestions, lots more, and I hope that these will provoke you to come up with your own ideas. One final thing that I'm going to cover is the evidence that we gathered of different ways in which people were gathering evidence for the significance of impacts arising from the media. Now, most press offices have already got a range of different techniques, and we covered some of those in the toolkit as well for metricizing reach. So easy. What the challenge is, roundly felt by those that we spoke to, was how do I measure the significance of this stuff? I'll let you read this in much more depth in the toolkit, but in brief, the idea that going beyond social media metrics, we can do qualitative analysis of social media for social media commentary. Health warning here, make sure you get ethics approval, and it is more complicated than you might think for social media analysis. And there's guidance on how you can go about doing that. Of course, combined with some of the metrics for reach that you get from these platforms, that can be very powerful. A similarly cheap and easy approach is to view media engagement as the beginning rather than the end of a process. This is now the wide open end of a funnel that enables you to access a significant numbers of people who might be interested in your research. Your task then is to try and get a proportion, even if a small proportion of those people, to engage directly with you. For example, through a social media campaign around the release of a launch of a report, a planned documentary, or whatever it might be, that is directing people to a website. Get these free tools and resources, fun quizzes, or whatever it is, behind the scenes footage, blah, blah, blah. And on that now, you've got ways of instantly capturing information. So as part of those fun quizzes, I'm getting information about understanding and awareness. I'm encouraging people now to come along to my webinar, to come along to this event, to use my toolkit, to subscribe to my newsletter. And GDPR compliant, I'm getting permission to follow up with people and find out what happens next. Also in the toolkit, we've got a case study of a researcher who used before-after polling. This is a researcher from Swansea University who got her research integrated into 4 episodes of the TV soap Casualty. She did a representative survey of Casualty viewers beforehand, asking 2 questions. 1, how aware are you of maggot therapy? And how disgusting do you think it is? After the episodes aired, the survey was repeated, discovering that there was a significant increase in awareness of maggot therapy and its benefits for antimicrobial resistance. And there was a significant reduction in the yuck factor, an important precursor to people then accepting the therapy on the NHS, which is ultimately the impact that she is seeking. So I'm going to wrap up at this point and let you actually have a look at this now and hand over to Michael. Michael, you should in theory be able to share your screen at this point. Give it a try.
Do that.
Great.
Okay. Hello, everyone. Thank you very much for that, Mark. Hope that's given you the overview of where this is coming from and where we hope you will take it. I'm just going to give you a very quick view of the toolkit itself and how it divides down into various sections. As you can see here from the home page, if you like, the landing page, there are 8 sections. So I'm going to sort of talk through those just in brief. I've just had a question actually, which I suppose is worth raising while I've got the opportunity. In this respect, who are professional staff? When we talk about professional staff, obviously there's a very wide range of professional staff at a university. So in this case, we are chiefly thinking of research office, research impact teams, press teams, comms teams. So those sorts of 2 broad camps of people. Depending on the university, obviously, one thing I've learned in this job is how wildly different most universities are from each other in the way that they are organised. So you may find that there are other people, other organisations, other departments that fit into the way that these issues are handled. But those are who we had in mind when we created it. So so the impact guide then. So essentially with our 8 sections, we have sort of 3 broad overviews, really, 3 broad categories of sections. So the first 3 sections, sorry, 1, 2, and 3, deal with the nature of impact, what it is, where it comes from, the sort of definition of it, what it is and what it isn't, and how it might happen and how we could help make it happen. Section 4 and 5 is about planning, and really this is one of the key aspects of what I've learned from this, is really everything we need to do earlier. The earlier in the process of the research cycle that professional services teams can get involved, the more likely it is that there will be an opportunity to plan the impact that you're looking for, and to carry through on that plan, and to gather the evidence that is so necessary for the REF impact case study. And indeed, sections 6 and 7 are the parts of the toolkit that deal with how to go about turning media engagement, perhaps a very broad, wide range of audiences across the world, how to turn that into evidence that demonstrates the impact that the research has had, that goes beyond just readership figures. And last of all, there's a sort of conclusion that brings us into looking at how we might sort of put everything we've learned in here together and think about how we might reformulate, reframe how these professional services teams work together, so that in the future for the next 7-year cycle of REF, for example, that we can put all these practices into use and have a full full period of time to go about creating those impacts that we're looking for. So that's the sort of broad 3-section breakdown of three sort of category breakdown of how this is laid out. So if we just plow on to the first section, perhaps I should mention that the way it was designed was to some of you may have looked at 8 sections and thought, oh, I haven't got the time in the day to read through 8 sections. Well, the toolkit is created in such a way that there is a 2-speed way of approaching it. So each of the sections here, as you can see, has been summarized with all of the key points in there for you to read and absorb. And if you wish to, you can simply take the rapid route through the toolkit by skipping between sections. And you'll just skip from summary page to summary page. And that way you can go through it in probably 10 to 15 minutes and get the lion's share of what the toolkit has to offer, at least in principle. And of course, if you'd like to dive into the topic pages, for each section, you'll see there's a lot more detail in there. And you can, absorb that at your leisure. So we've talked a fair bit about impact, what it is and what it isn't. I think that the nature of impact, definition of impact, has been a sort of continually thorny issue since it was introduced for the previous REF cycle. And I'd like to think that this perhaps shines a bit, reduces some of that confusion, I'd hope. But what I'd like to concentrate on really is this aspect of planning. And I don't think we can emphasize enough how important planning is in the terms of establishing with the researcher from the earliest point as possible exactly what they hope to get out of the research, or rather exactly what they hope others will get out of the research. And therefore to be able to get a sense of direction of travel and of narrowing down the field to particular beneficiaries, potential beneficiaries, and therefore the potential media outlets and other means that you might have at your disposal to reach these people. So that sense of comms and research teams and the researchers themselves getting together much earlier is really critical. There's a fair bit in this topic about some of the things that Mark was alluding to in terms of missed opportunities. Very often, I think you'll all have had the experience where the first you hear of a piece of research is that the researcher in question shows up one day saying, oh, I've just got this published in a journal last week, or if you're very fortunate, it might be, I intend to have this published in a journal a week from now, leaving you to scramble to try and make something of that, to pull together a list of potential targets, to hit the phones, call up friendly journalists, and so on and so forth. And that's very much part of your roles as communications teams, and no doubt you're used to it and good at it. But the point is that if the first you hear of that research is when it's about to be brought into the public, it's already way too late to do the sort of evidence gathering that you need, or the researcher needs, to be able to turn the impact, if you like, in the small I sense of the term of that research into refable impact. Without that evidence, you're going to be hard pushed to demonstrate that you have that you have a case that can say, here's what people thought beforehand and here's what people thought after, and the difference therein is the impact of the research. So that sense of missed opportunities, again, it comes back to getting around to these things earlier than the week before the piece is published in a journal. And the other key aspect there is targeting. I think probably, I know that we as journalists are guilty of this, but sometimes there's the sense in which more is better. And that as long as there is a very large number of zeros in the readership figure, then that can only be a good thing. But clearly, it's simply not the case that everyone is interested in every kind of research, nor can everyone benefit from every kind of research. So it pays to think about targeting and think very closely about the niche audience who may be very substantially affected or benefit or you know, stand to benefit from research rather than the broadest possible brush, the broadest possible audience that may not. There's a fair number of pages here about how to go about practically thinking about how to identify those smaller audiences, those specific beneficiaries. And there are some thoughts about what routes you might find to meet those audiences, to reach those audiences. It could be as obvious as you know, putting out releases about to general purpose audiences, or it could be targeted media, it could be events, it could be focus groups, public engagement type events. There are a very wide range of opportunities which the press team can help with. Often public engagement teams are more focused, I think, on those sorts of research-led activities, and perhaps the comms teams can get more involved to share their skills with those more research-focused activities to help give them a bigger audience reach. Among the tools that the toolkit contains is this impact planning template, and this is a way of boiling down these thoughts into a sort of table, so that you can go about identifying your targets and ticking them off. There's a number of other helpful tools here as well. So go back to the main menu. So the 4 and 5, as I say, is about planning and getting there earlier. The just to sort of labour that point about niche audiences, smaller audiences rather than larger audiences. Sometimes it might be worthwhile reaching out to individuals, highly influential individuals, or you know, gatekeepers who can help you reach those audiences. Sometimes there will be an issue around whether you should go to some audiences first. For example, some groups may be easy to reach, but perhaps less likely to stand to benefit from the research, and therefore, in the long run, perhaps less valuable. Other groups may be harder to reach, but potentially much more affected, or potentially much more stand to benefit from the research, and therefore it pays to identify these people up front so that you can spend the time that is required to reach them. It's a case of priorities. So probably, I think, perhaps the most important bit of the toolkit is sections 6 and 7, which deal with how to go about turning media reach really into evidence. How do we go about ensuring that we're not just reaching people, but that we can demonstrate that we've reached them and changed their minds? And that happens here in 6 and 7. And I think while press teams, comms teams will have all sorts of tools at your disposal already that you use, they are not always the most appropriate tool. They're not always the metric that they offer is not always that useful. Again, it comes down to whether you're demonstrating reach or whether you're demonstrating significance. There's a number of tools here in these sections that can help you go about getting that evidence. Now, some of these will be the sorts of things you already use, perhaps viewer readership numbers of other media, might be media monitoring tools that you use. There might be, you might even use the conversations analytics that we offer to our members. You're also going to need to lean upon researchers to report back things to you that they come across in their work. And you can help them with such things as surveys and the sorts of follow-up emails to researchers to prompt them to inform you of the things that have happened. I'm sure you again will have all had the experience of talking to an academic who perhaps you worked with some time ago, only for them to say, oh yes, did I not tell you these series of extremely important things happened after I published that piece, thanks so much for your help. So it's important that we record all these things so that we can use them to demonstrate the impact that we've had. But there are also some other tools that that Mark recommends are very useful. And these are these three here: the social media analysis, the funnel approach, and polling of before and after views held by the audiences. And really, these are, I think these are really crucial ways of turning that sense of audience reach into the sort of facts that count for a ref impact case study. So social media analysis, there's quite a lot of detail there that will help you put some of that into use. You can use things like keyword searches. You can use various sorts of analytical tools to look at the sort of textual content of social media posts to get a sense of how people feel about an issue. There are various approaches, some of which are quite time consuming but effective, others are somewhat shallower. The funnel approach is perhaps the easiest, where you widely publicize a URL, a link, a resource of some kind, and then you encourage people to go to it. So you can publicize it through all the usual channels. And the idea is to get as many people as possible engaging with, for example, a survey, a poll, something like that. And you can then create that list of people and go about engaging with them in other ways to try and elicit more detailed views from them about the topic in hand. And you might sort of want to encourage them with, you know, the possibility of prizes or some such. There might be some sort of means that you can encourage that in kind of engagement that you need. But the idea is to get views from the target range of people, target groups of people, so that you can compare how they feel about something before and after. And last of all, the before and after polling. This is something that you would commission a third party to do for you. So it may be an expensive route that you might not want to take for every opportunity, but it is something that's there. And I think it was mentioned earlier, but the example of the maggot therapy and about how people were polled to the extent that they felt, how they felt about maggot therapy before and after the episode of Casualty was shown. And they can therefore get a sense of how they were able to change people's perspectives and evidence that.
And at the bottom of that, you can listen to my interview with Professor Nigam as well.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
And last of all, it's important to talk about where do we go from here? And I think really this is a key part of what we've hoped to do here, which is to bring together your two similar but different sets of skills, and to ensure that for the future we can go about putting them together early enough, to jigsaw the different skills together well enough that all of this will become easier and more ingrained and more part and parcel of how you work. So there are a number of suggestions here. I think inevitably there are no can we get this done before the March 2021 deadline. I think there are no immediate short answers. There are no magic bullets here. These are largely going to be sort of medium to long term shifts in how things are done. But I think it is important to consider some of the things that can be done easily, and others that might take more substantial change. But I guess one thing is, again, going back to what Mark alluded to earlier, is encouraging researchers to do some of this perspective changing, if you like, for themselves. I think, again, as press teams, you'll have plenty of experience of really wanting a particular professor, for example, to write for you, and they are not particularly minded to do so. And I think there is, it's not widespread, but it's definitely there. There is a sense that many researchers do not wish to engage with the media. Perhaps they think it's not worthwhile. Perhaps they think that it's not something they should be doing. Perhaps they think that perhaps they've done it before and had a poor experience one way or the other. But these are sorts of attitudes we need to change from the outset. And I think anything we can do to encourage researchers to understand that media engagement is not an add-on, it's not a bolt-on nice to have that you only get round to after you've done all the important work. It has to be something that they think of from the beginning, and we as communications people have to help them along that path of thinking about it from the beginning. And that's really the crucial takeaway, I think. I'm going to stop talking. I hope that's been a high level but somewhat useful kind of overview of what the toolkit has to offer. There is, of course, more to read. I would encourage you to read it. Thank you. Mark, is there anything that you'd like to add?
No, I'm not going to add anything. I want to have some time for discussion. I also wondered whether you might conclude with a case study. I think maybe the one that works most closely with the conversation. How about we stop for some discussion, and then before the end, it might be a rousing conclusion to just hear a little bit more about one example of some researchers that you worked very closely with. How does that sound? Good.
That sounds good.
Can I encourage you, please, everyone, to put your questions in the chat rather than opening mic? There are too many of us. We will talk over each other. So if you've got a question, stick it in the chat, and Michael and I will do our best to answer. Equally, Ben has got the ball rolling, Ben Hall, by sharing some of the things that he and his team are doing. And given the range of different people on the call here, it would be great to hear from your perspective. What are the ideas you've got, things that don't look like they're covered in our toolkit, but here's a great idea. Why don't you learn from this? And let's just share knowledge as well. So whether it's a question or a comment in that vein, stick it in the chat. Great. So Fidel, thanks. Lots of food for thought. Agreed on the importance of media work in sharing research findings. Aoife saying, hi everyone, thanks for a great webinar. I'm Communications Officer at the Trinity Long Room Hub in Dublin. I've always found researchers and academics more than willing to engage with media. Great. However, what I'd like to ask is how we can improve or better tailor our press releases and media invitations to prompt media engagement. Any tips? Michael, do you want to go on this one first?
Sure. I mean, I think it's safe to say that most press releases that get ignored are ignored because they're not of any interest to the recipient. So if you're going to take this as a numbers game, in order to not get ignored, don't send it to people who aren't, to whom it's not going to be useful. Or to put it another way, make sure that when you're sending it to someone, you've tailored it in such a way that it is useful to them. I think, I mean, it's the classic refrain of all comms officers is how can I get my press release written about? How can I get this out there? There are infinitely more of you, of comms teams, than there are journalists, and I think that the long and the short of it is that sometimes it's just not going to get picked up. But I think I feel like that's sort of outside the realm of this toolkit, which really is focused on a sort of a different take on that on that matter, which is this is sort of communications engagement in general rather than specifically communications for the forms of impact. I'm going to swerve that question is what I'm going to say.
That's a good answer, though. It answers the question very directly. Of course, the first step is in a media-based pathway to impact is that we get media engagement, and if we haven't got that, then all of the other things we've been talking about are not going to come flowing from that. So it's a good place to start. Michael, the next one is probably for you as well. It would be nice to triangulate this if others have different perspectives, because we're all working in different contexts. How long does it take typically from an academic getting in touch with a media office to this actually, yeah, what is it, getting out? Getting picked up might be another thing. So I guess to press release or to being picked up by the media. I'm really aware this will vary, but can you answer
that? I suspect that the answer to very many of these questions will be it varies. Certainly at the conversation, from our perspective, it's not uncommon for us to turn things around on the same day. If we get a pitch, if we get something that's relevant at the time that we need it, it will be picked up immediately and taken to hand. I think, yeah, it depends, but ideally timing is everything. So if you're pitching something that is relevant to something that was in the news that morning on the Today programme, then your chances of it being picked up are going to be greater. If you're pitching something that is a bit evergreen, a bit timeless, it may well still be picked up, but it might well be bumped, possibly repeatedly bumped, in exchange for other things that are more timely.
And that links to Kieran's question as well. If timing is everything, well, what about the other side of this, embargoes? What is the role of embargoes for you, Michael?
Well, I mean, we do use a lot of embargoed material. We have regular updates from the likes of Science, Nature, AAS, the Royal Society, all the other big research publishers. And so a big chunk of those will be embargoed, so we use them. And I think they can be very useful for academics. Again, from my perspective, sometimes one of the difficulties we face is trying to get academics to write what we want them to write, by which I mean, to the piece, to the length that we want them to write, in the time that we have available. And while, journalists and comms people might be used to turning on a sixpence and putting something out within 24 hours, academics often less so. So an embargo is useful because it gives us more time to breathe, more time for the academic to produce what is required. So if you have the opportunity to let us, or indeed the rest other people in the media, know, the more advanced time you can, the easier it is for others to fit into their schedules and to plan other content which will inevitably be coming out around it.
Good. So I'm going to take a couple of questions together. Lucy and Neil, talking about, well, first of all, Lucy, how do you get a press office to prioritise covering research and to get them to do that more? I think for me, this is about strategic relationships and building trust. And so those high-level conversations that make people aware of the potential for collaboration and for win-wins. And one of the key win-wins here is press officers who want more engagement from academics, who can realize that actually by engaging with research and getting impact for academics, this is a way of potentially, for a certain proportion of academics, getting much more engagement and active engagement with those academics. Neil's then asking, well, to what extent can you use this short term to beef up ref submissions? We've got now until the end of the year for capturing, for actually achieving impact. And the key way in which this can help, and that I'm regularly recommending the use of media for when I'm advising universities on impact, is where you've got something which is highly significant, that way you do not have enough reach. So we've got something that we know this has worked in one sector, in one community. We've got the case study and we've got the evidence. This has transformed how this company works or organization works. And these are the benefits. How do we get this out at scale? Is this that we're now targeting another country? In which case, great, let's mobilize media within that country. Or is it that we're going from the regional to the national within the UK? Well, depending on what we're targeting, the media can be a great way of getting the story out that, yeah, here's this case study, this is what has transformed, and then to start generating the interest from others. Now, of course, you need to be ready and poised to capture that interest and start funneling it through to a process where, right, this is how you can do what we just did with these guys. Here is our toolkit, or here is the team of people to work with you. And you need to make sure you're ready to capture that rather than a whole lot of noise being generated and you're on holiday, or it's just you and you run out of time after you've helped the first person. We're going to run out of time ourselves. Michael, can I just ask you to just have a look if there's any other questions you want to answer before maybe giving us a case study from the toolkit.
I just saw one here from Joe Crossland at Glasgow. Our best media engagements come from offering an exclusive to a particular outlet, allowing time for a researcher to sit down with the journalist and talk in depth about their research. This relationship building is so important for achieving good, empathetic coverage, especially on sensitive topics. Blanket PRs don't really give that that opportunity. I think that's very important. There is a place for a very, a very broad press release that goes to many outlets. But yes, relationship building is crucial because it's about trust. It's about what journalists are looking for is sources that are reliable. It's something I say to groups of academics when I'm training them is always, if you've ever wondered why such and such a professor is always the person in the news being interviewed about he or she, their pet topic, it's not because they are necessarily the best academic in the field. It's because they can be reliably relied upon to answer the phone when the journalist is looking for a quote or a comment. And consequently, that sort of personal relationship based on trust and reliability and having good stories to add is really essential. And that relationship could be between the journalist and the academic, or indeed between the journalist and the comms team representing them. So I think that is true. Perhaps that sort of segues quite nicely actually into the case study. Do I need to share my screen again? Yeah, that's so. There's one or two, there's a few case studies in the toolkit. There's also one or two that I'd like to share of my own. And the first is this from, this is in the toolkit. This is about a piece that we ran recently, just before Christmas, about a study from an academic at Birmingham and one from Canada, looking into how UN peacekeepers had behaved disreputibly in Haiti and had left many hundreds of fathered children, which they then abandoned. And this sort of caused a pretty international outcry, really, which led to, it was published, co-published, if you like, with the Times. So a journalist there who had worked on the Oxfam revelations from a year or so ago, we went to him and he was really interested because, of course, it all plays into the same sorts of fields, the same topics that he was working on anyway. So this ended up in the Times on the front page there that you can see. Also in the New York Times, it led to an op-ed in the New York Times, the Washington Post, numerous other international outlets, Reuters, and that led to a series of calls for action, government inquiries, not least in setting up of a commission in Chile to examine the behavior of their military, who had been a part of the UN troops in Haiti. And this was Kamara Insight's team that work with academics in this way to kind of pull out long form, more drawn out stories that can be told at length. So that's clearly an example of where something that was an interesting piece of research, anyway, interesting and important, it was put together in such a way that it created a lot of engagement, went sort of international quite quickly, and led to demands in government, calls for action, and a number of inquiries. And the UN is now working closely with those researchers. So clearly that's caused a fair amount of shockwaves. A second one, very different. This was a piece from a Staffordshire academic about the plastics pollution. This was from a year or so ago, 2 years ago. And it's about how nurdles, which are the raw components of plastic production, those little pellets that you can see there in the picture, and how these are in fact a large problem, a pollution problem. And this was published by The Conversation. It did quite well, and it was picked up via a republication in Newsweek. It was picked up by Plastics Europe, who are a big industry body of all the plastics producers in Europe, and they were, surprised, shocked, horrified, interested, got in touch with the author, and this led the author to be quite involved in discussing her work with the relevant people, but also using her work, using her research to go about drawing up new procedures, ways of working, nurdle management, as they describe it, to ensure that the extent of plastic pollution could be minimized. Again, doesn't have the same sort of political shockwaves perhaps as the first, but a very clear example of how a smaller niche audience can indeed be reached by a story that speaks to them directly, rather than necessarily a very wide audience. So I thought those two case studies were quite good examples of two sort of ends of the scale.
Wonderful. Thank you very, very much indeed. We're going to close things out. We've reached 2 o'clock. Thank you, Michael. Thank you for everyone who is on this call, who were part of the Conversations Media Advisory Group, who helped to co-design this with us. And we've all learned a new word, nurdle. Fantastic. I'm going to put a link to the toolkit. Go and check it out for yourselves. Enjoy and stay in touch.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Mark. Thank you very much for coming. And yes, if any of you, I realise there's an awful lot of questions and interest on the right there. So if any of you have other questions for me, please do pick up the phone, get in touch, drop me an email. Be very happy to hear from you.
Great.
Thank you all.